Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy my new stories every day. It had been one of those exhausting days. Work meetings dragged longer than they should. Traffic was a nightmare. And all I could think about was getting home, pouring a drink, and sinking into the couch. I wasn't supposed to be home early today. My schedule had changed last minute, but I figured Andrea would appreciate the surprise. I smiled at the thought of seeing her, imagining her smile and the warmth of home. Little did I know, I was about to step into a nightmare. When I got to the front door, something felt wrong. I slid the key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. My frustration grew as I tried again, jiggling the key, pulling it out and shoving it back in with more force. It was like the lock had decided to betray me. Then I heard it, a muffled sound from inside, a moan. I froze, every nerve in my body coming alive. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. I pressed my ear against the door, and that's when I heard it again, louder this time, a woman's moan. A familiar one, Andrea's. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my head. Couldn't believe it. A flood of disbelief, anger, and confusion washed over me all at once. My hand clenched around the doorknob, shaking as I wrestled with the lock one more time. I didn't care anymore. In a fit of rage, I kicked the door. It burst open, slamming into the wall behind it. I stormed inside, the sound of my footsteps drowning out everything else. The moans were coming from the bedroom now, clear as day. My mind raced, piecing together what I was about to see before I even saw it. With every step, the betrayal felt sharper, slicing through me like shards of broken glass. I barged into the bedroom without thinking, without even knocking, and there she was, Andrea, my wife, half naked on the bed. But it wasn't just her. My stomach turned as I caught sight of the man on top of her. It was Jacob, my friend, someone I trusted. The world seemed to stop. Everything I knew, everything I believed in, shattered in that moment. I stood frozen, the image burning into my mind. The two of them together, tangled in sheets that were supposed to be ours, making sounds that should have only been reserved for me. My breathing came in ragged gasps, my vision blurred with red-hot anger. I couldn't process it. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. But it was. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but I was rooted in place, watching them, my wife and my friend, destroying everything we had built. Jacob was the first to notice me. He scrambled off the bed, eyes wide with panic, stammering some pathetic excuse, but I couldn't hear him. All I could hear was the sound of my heart pounding in my ears and Andrea's breathless voice, still trembling from their sickening act of betrayal. "Mark," she whispered, pulling the sheets around her as if that would cover the damage already done. Her face, once beautiful to me, now only looked like a stranger's mask, twisted with guilt and fear. I clenched my fists so tight my knuckles turned white. The rage building inside me was unbearable, searing through my chest like fire. Without a word, I turned and stormed out of the bedroom. I couldn't trust myself to stay in there. I needed to breathe. I needed to think. I found myself in the living room, pacing, my mind racing through a million thoughts. How long had this been going on? How many lies had she told me while looking me in the eyes? And Jacob? Jacob, my friend, the man I had laughed with, shared stories with, trusted. The betrayal cut deep, but even in the haze of fury, I knew one thing. I was going to make them both pay. I wasn't the kind of man to just walk away and let this go. No, they would regret ever thinking they could deceive me. I grabbed my phone, my hands still trembling, and called the lawyer. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. I was going to burn everything down. If Andrea wanted to throw away our marriage, then I was going to make sure she felt the of that choice for the rest of her life. I'd take the house, the money, everything. Jacob wasn't safe either. His life, his reputation, his job, I would make sure it all crumbled. As I hung up the phone, I took a deep breath, feeling the first wave of control wash over me. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The look on their faces when I walked out of that room was just the first taste of the destruction I was about to rain down on them. I turned back to the bedroom, where they were still awkwardly trying to get dressed, avoiding my gaze. Andrea opened her mouth to say something, but I raised a hand, stopping her. Don't. Just don't. I didn't need to hear her excuses or apologies. The time for words was over. The only thing that mattered now was my revenge, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. This was war. The plot had only just begun to unfold. What happened next would shatter more than just trust. It would leave nothing standing. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The events replayed over and over in my mind like a broken record, each time making me more furious, more determined. Every fiber of my being was consumed by one thought: how to make Andrea and Jacob pay for what they had done to me. They hadn't said much after I walked out of the bedroom the day before. Jacob mumbled something about it being a mistake, but I shut him down with a single look that could have pierced through his skull. Andrea sat on the edge of the bed, her head down, clutching the sheet around her like it could somehow protect her from the reality of what she'd done. It was pathetic. The sun was starting to rise now, casting a faint orange glow through the blinds. I hadn't left the couch all night, staring into the dim living room like it was a war zone. My phone was buzzing nonstop, messages from Andrea. Apologies, explanations, desperate attempts to salvage the wreckage she had caused. I hadn't responded to a single one. My lawyer had been brief and to the point when I'd called. The divorce papers would be drawn up immediately. Everything was in motion now. I'd given my life to this woman, and she'd thrown it away for a cheap thrill with my so-called friend. Well, she'd get what was coming to her. I stood up, my legs stiff from sitting so long. My mind was made up. I was done letting them sit in silence, thinking they had any control over this situation. I was going to confront them both today. I headed to the kitchen and made a strong cup of coffee. Not that I needed it. My blood was already pumping with the kind of adrenaline that comes when you know a storm is about to hit. I thought about my plan. It wasn't enough just to walk away. I wanted them to feel the same level of humiliation, the same sting of betrayal that I had felt when I walked into that bedroom and saw their bodies tangled together. But first, I needed to face them. Andrea was still upstairs. I could hear her moving around, probably trying to figure out what to say to me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This confrontation wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. I climbed the stairs and pushed open the bedroom door without knocking. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her bathrobe, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Mark," she started, her voice shaky. "I know I messed up. I'm so sorry. Please just let me explain." I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, glaring at her. "Explain? What exactly do you think you need to explain, Andrea?" I saw everything. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but I wasn't moved. This wasn't the time for pity. I was too angry for that. It was a mistake. I don't even know why it happened. It didn't mean anything. I swear, she pleaded, her hands trembling as she spoke. I let out a harsh laugh. "Didn't mean anything. You were in our bed with my friend. How the hell do you expect me to believe it didn't mean anything?" She stood up, taking a hesitant step toward me, but I backed away, shaking my head. "Don't even think about touching me," I warned, my voice low and cold. "You've already done enough damage. Mark, I'm begging you, please. We can fix this. We've been through so much together. You can't just throw everything away because of one stupid mistake." "I'm throwing everything away," I repeated, incredulous. "You're the one who threw everything away, Andrea. You threw away our marriage, our trust, us, the moment you decided to crawl into bed with Jacob." Her face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she was going to collapse. But I didn't feel sorry for her. I was done feeling anything for her except anger. I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You already lost me," I replied, my voice as hard as steel. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. The divorce papers will be ready by tomorrow." Her eyes widened in shock. "Divorce? Mark, please don't do this. We can work through this. I'll do anything, therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't leave me." The desperation in her voice would have moved me once. But not now. Not after what she did. "It's too late," I said firmly. "I'll be gone by the end of the day. You can keep the house for now, but that's just temporary. I'm taking everything I can, and I'm going to make sure you regret this every single day for the rest of your life." I could see the terror in her eyes, the realization that I wasn't bluffing. This wasn't some dramatic gesture or threat I was throwing out in anger. This was real. She dropped to her knees in front of me, sobbing. "Mark, please, I'm begging you. Don't leave me like this." I stepped back, disgusted. "Get up. I'm not going to stand here and listen to you beg. You made your choice. Now live with the consequences." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her on the floor, crying. My mind was already on the next step, Jacob. He wasn't going to get off easy either. As I grabbed my car keys and headed out the door, I knew exactly where to find him. He'd probably be at his office, acting like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just destroyed one of the only friendships he had left. The drive over was a blur. I barely even registered the traffic, the lights, the world outside my car. All I could think about was how Jacob's face would look when I walked into his office. The same way Andrea's face had crumpled when I told her it was over. I parked the car outside his office building and took a deep breath. My heart was racing, but this wasn't the time to second-guess myself. This was my moment. I walked into the building and took the elevator to his floor. His receptionist gave me a confused look as I marched past her, heading straight for his office without so much as a glance. I pushed open the door and found him sitting at his desk, leaning back in his chair like he didn't have a care in the world. His smug face turned pale when he saw me. "Mark, look, man, I didn't let him finish." I grabbed the nearest chair and slammed it into his desk, sending papers flying everywhere. "Shut up, Jacob. You don't get to talk." He stood up, holding his hands out in front of him like I was about to punch him, and I was close. "Listen, man, I'm sorry, okay? It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen." I glared at him, my hands trembling with rage. "A mistake? You don't accidentally sleep with your best friend's wife, Jacob. You made a choice just like she did. And now you're both going to pay for it. What do you want me to say?" he asked, his voice shaking. I screwed up. "I know that. But it's over, okay? It won't happen again." I leaned in close, my voice low and dangerous. "You're damn right it won't happen again. Because I'm going to make sure your life is a living hell. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. You'll lose your job, your reputation, everything." His face went pale as the reality of what I was saying sank in. "Mark, please, we can fix this." I laughed bitterly. "There's no fixing this. You betrayed me, Jacob. You and Andrea. Both of you are dead to me now. So get ready, because this is just the beginning." With that, I turned and walked out of his office, slamming the door behind me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The drive home from Jacob's office felt surreal. My hands were still shaking from the confrontation, my heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and rage. Jacob's face as I left his office was burned into my memory, a blend of panic, fear, and shame. He knew what was coming, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But this was just the beginning. Andrea hadn't even begun to understand the weight of what she had done. She had tried to apologize, to beg, but I wasn't interested in her words. Her betrayal cut too deep, and I wasn't the kind of man to just walk away. I wanted her to feel what I felt, helpless, humiliated, destroyed. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine, sitting in silence for a moment. My house, our house, had become a prison. Every corner, every piece of furniture held memories of a life that no longer existed. I clenched my fists, thinking about how it all crumbled in a single afternoon. The only way to reclaim my life was to burn it all down. I got out of the car and walked toward the house, my steps deliberate, my mind focused. I pushed open the front door, and the silence inside was deafening. Andrea wasn't on the couch or in the kitchen. I knew where she would be, upstairs. I headed up the steps, the weight of each footfall matching the heaviness in my chest. When I reached our bedroom, I saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, just like I had left her. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. She looked up when she heard me enter, her voice soft, broken. "Mark, please, can we talk?" There's nothing to talk about, I said flatly, crossing my arms as I stood in the doorway. I told you it's over. I've already contacted the lawyer. You'll get the papers soon. Her eyes filled with fresh tears, and she wiped them away with shaking hands. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I love you, Mark. I don't want to lose you. You should have thought about that before you invited Jacob into our bed. I shot back, my voice laced with bitterness. You knew exactly what you were doing. You made a choice, Andrea, and now you'll have to live with it. She stood up, taking a step toward me, her voice trembling. It was a mistake. I was confused. You didn't what? I interrupted, my anger flaring up again. You didn't mean to betray me. You didn't mean to destroy everything we had. Spare me the excuses. She stopped, staring at me with a look of desperation, as if she could somehow make me understand. But there was nothing to understand. Nothing could undo the image of her and Jacob in our bed. The betrayal was too raw, too deep. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Anything. Then let's start with you packing your things and getting the hell out of this house. Because the only thing left between us is a divorce. Andrea's face crumpled, and she sank to the floor, sobbing into her hands. I turned away, unable to watch her break down. She had made her choice, and now she was paying for it. But this wasn't enough. I wasn't done yet. I walked out of the bedroom, leaving her behind, and headed downstairs. My mind was already moving to the next part of my plan. If Andrea thought she could get away with betraying me, she was about to find out how wrong she was. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in a long time. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Hey, Mark. Long time no hear. Hey, Paul. Listen, I need a favor. Paul had been a friend from college, someone I'd drifted away from over the years but who had a knack for uncovering dirt on people. He was a private investigator now, and if anyone could dig up something on Jacob and Andrea, it was him. What's up? You sound serious. I took a deep breath. I need you to look into something for me. My wife, she's been cheating on me. And the guy, is Jacob. Paul was silent for a moment. Then his voice came back, cold and professional. Damn, man. I'm sorry. What do you need me to do? I need everything you can find on Jacob. I want to know where he goes, who he sees, what he does. If there's any dirt on him, I want it. And I want it fast. Paul didn't hesitate. You got it. I'll get started right away. I'll keep you updated. I hung up the phone, feeling the first spark of satisfaction since this nightmare began. Jacob thought he could betray me and walk away unscathed. He had no idea what was coming. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and cold, tense silences between Andrea and me. She stayed in the guest room, giving me space, but it didn't matter. The house felt suffocating with her presence, a constant reminder of the betrayal that still stung like an open wound. Then Paul called. I got something, he said, his voice low. You're not going to like it. My grip tightened on the phone. What did you find? Jacob, he's got a lot of secrets. Financial stuff, mostly. He's been siphoning money from his company. Embezzlement. It's not enough to get him arrested yet, but it's shady. And then there's this, he's been seeing someone else on top of your wife. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What? Yeah. He's been messing around with some woman who works at the same company. I got pictures, texts. The guy's a serial cheater. My blood boiled. So not only had Jacob betrayed me with Andrea, but he was cheating on her too. The irony would have been amusing if I wasn't so angry. I want everything, I said through gritted teeth. Send me everything you've got. Paul agreed and promised to send the files over by the end of the day. I hung up and stared out the window, my mind racing with the possibilities. This was the ammunition I needed. Not only could I ruin Jacob's life, but I could expose him for the lying, cheating scumbag he was. I paced the room, my hands clenched into fists. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. I had the power now, and I was going to use it. That evening, as Andrea sat quietly in the guest room, probably hoping for some kind of miracle to save our marriage, I opened my laptop and stared at the files Paul had sent over. The pictures, the texts, everything was there. Jacob's affair with the other woman was in full color, undeniable evidence of his deceit. I knew what I had to do next. I sent the files to his boss. Every incriminating detail, every damning photo. It was over for him. His career, his reputation, it was all going to crumble just like my marriage. As I hit send, a wave of satisfaction washed over me. Jacob's downfall was in motion, and soon, Andrea would feel the full weight of my revenge too. This wasn't just retribution. This was justice. And I wasn't done yet. The moment I sent the files to Jacob's boss, the weight that had been crushing me for days started to lift. But the fire of vengeance still burned hot in my chest. Exposing Jacob's affair with another woman was satisfying, but I knew that was just the first step. He needed to suffer the full consequences of what he'd done to me, to us. And Andrea, she wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed either. The next few days were eerily quiet. Andrea kept her distance, still hoping that somehow things would blow over. She didn't know the storm I was brewing. I barely spoke to her, only acknowledging her presence when necessary. I wanted her to feel the coldness, the finality of what was coming. Paul's investigation had handed me a weapon, and now I was ready to use it. It didn't take long for the fallout to hit. Jacob's boss called him in for a meeting, which turned into an interrogation. The embezzlement accusations, combined with the proof of his affair, hit him like a freight train. He was suspended immediately, pending further investigation. I could almost imagine the panic on his face as he realized his career was circling the drain. But that wasn't enough. I needed to see him break, needed to see the fear in his eyes when he realized his whole world was collapsing. So I paid him a visit. It was early evening when I arrived at his apartment building. He wasn't expecting me, and the look of shock on his face when he opened the door was priceless. He hadn't shaved in days, his hair disheveled, and he looked like he hadn't slept. "Mark," he stammered, what are you doing here?" I pushed past him and walked inside without waiting for an invitation. His apartment was a mess, papers scattered everywhere, empty bottles on the counter. The man was falling apart, and I loved every second of it. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold and steady. Jacob closed the door and leaned against it, his eyes darting around the room like he was searching for an escape. "Look, man, I know you're pissed, but I swear Shut up," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "You don't get to talk anymore." He flinched, his face pale as I stepped closer. "You thought you could screw me over, take my wife, and walk away like nothing happened. You thought you could keep your job, your life, after what you did. Mark, I didn't mean—" I said, "Shut up," I shouted, my fists clenching at my sides. "I've been watching you, Jacob. I know about the money you've been skimming from your company. I know about the other woman. And guess what? Your boss knows too." His eyes widened in terror. What did you do?" I smiled, the satisfaction of his panic feeding the dark pleasure building inside me. "I gave them everything. Every dirty little secret you thought you could hide. Your affair, your theft, all of it. You're done, Jacob. Your career is over. You'll be lucky if you don't end up in jail." He collapsed into the nearest chair, his hands trembling as he buried his face in them. "Jesus, Mark, please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen." I scoffed. "You made a choice, Jacob. You and Andrea both. And now you're both going to pay for it. Please," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I've already lost my job. I'm losing everything. What more do you want?" I stared down at him, my heart cold and hard as stone. "I want you to feel what I felt when I walked into that bedroom. I want you to know what it's like to lose everything." I turned on my heel and walked out of his apartment without another word, leaving him to crumble in his misery. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. When I got home, Andrea was waiting for me in the living room, pacing nervously. She stopped when she saw me, her face tight with anxiety. She must have sensed that something was coming. "Mark, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You've barely said a word to me in days." I walked past her, my face expressionless, and poured myself a drink. I could feel her eyes on me, desperate for some kind of explanation, but I wasn't ready to give it to her. Not yet. She stepped closer, her voice soft. Mark, please. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We've been through so much together. Don't throw it all away. I turned to face her, my eyes cold and empty. You threw it all away the moment you let Jacob into our bed. She flinched, the words hitting her like a slap. I know I did. But I love you, Mark. I've always loved you. Love? I scoffed, taking a sip of my drink. You don't know the first thing about love, Andrea. You betrayed me in the worst possible way. You destroyed everything we had. Her eyes filled with tears, and she took a step toward me, reaching out. Please just give me another chance. I'll do whatever it takes. I set the glass down and stepped toward her, my face inches from hers. There's no going back from this. I've already started the divorce process, and soon, everything we built together will be gone. Just like you wanted. Her eyes widened in shock. Divorce? Mark, no. Please don't do this. I leaned in, my voice a cold whisper. It's already done. And as for Jacob, his life is ruined. He's lost his job, his reputation, everything. And you? You're going to lose everything too. I stepped back, watching as the realization of what I'd done hit her like a tidal wave. Her face crumpled, and she sank to her knees, sobbing. Mark, please, she begged, her voice choked with tears. I'll do anything. Don't leave me like this.